Perfect. Perfect. Well, first things first, we'd love to kick off with some introductions. I know we asked all of you to share some information about yourself. We can start by doing the same. I'll kick things off and then allow Shannon to introduce herself as well. For those who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name's Abby Parker. I'm one of the co-founders here at Elate and our COO. I truly do love, eat, sleep, and breathe all things strategy and operations. So anytime I get to talk about this, although a more public setting isn't always the most comfortable. I do love getting to do it. And so excited to dive in on the conversation today, especially where AI starts to meet strategy, because I think there's a lot of interesting things happening with AI in general. And then what I personally care about is how that then intersects with us as fellow strategy and operations leaders. So excited for the conversation here today. I know I'm seeing quite a few familiar, I guess not faces, but names in the in the participants and chat. But truly a pleasure to meet all of you who I haven't had the chance to meet with.
Wonderful. And I always say I don't get to carry the luxury of the title of co-founder, but I am just as passionate about strategy execution. So my name's Shannon Keedy. I'm the director of solutions consulting. I come from a consulting background with a true passion for executing on strategy. It's something that really is fundamental in propelling businesses forward across all industries. And we get to see that live and in action in our day to day. So I'm excited to talk about how that industry itself is evolving through AI.
Perfect. We'll go high level agenda here. Really, what we're going to be talking about is a few main topics. For those of you that don't know, this is webinar one in a series of three webinars. So each one's going to go a little deeper into more specifics. But to kick things off, what Shannon and I are going to be focused on today is starting big picture. As we zoom out, like what are the bigger trends that we're seeing in AI for strategy specifically? We'll then use that to dive into what are some of the risks and cautions that we would share. I think the flip side of those are also what are the opportunities. So we'll speak to those there as well and transition that into some specific AI use cases. I think talking in theory is great, but the more practical we can get, the better. I think all of us as strategy and operations folks live in the practicality. So we'll dive into that and again leave time for some Q&A at the end. So our focus here is to kind of start through those main areas. But as Tim shared, please drop comments or questions throughout in that Q&A bubble. If it makes sense, we'll answer them live. Otherwise, we'll make sure we start to dig through those in the Q&A later on. So excited for the conversation. But Shannon, I'll let you kick things off with kind of how you've been seeing things from a big picture perspective.
Yeah, I think it's important to zoom out to look at the broader landscape so that we can then better understand how the evolution of AI is specifically impacting strategy teams and what we should then be paying attention to now and how we think about it. So that starts with the just in the last 18 months, we've seen greater innovation and deployment of AI than we have in the last decade. What started as isolated experiments around content creation has now moved into deep business operations, from forecasting scenario and modeling to now decision intelligence. Enterprises are no longer asking if they'll use AI, rather how we will implement it and how fast we're going to do that operationally, but with the caveat of responsibly. And that goes into the speed of learning. So one of the biggest shifts we're seeing is that the speed of learning is actually overtaking the scale in which AI is being implemented. So this includes, so now that this scale is being overtaken, organizations that are moving fast are not necessarily the biggest. They're the ones that are iterating, experimenting, and learning quickly on how AI is shaping their processes. AI capabilities are no longer limited to data science teams, right? Business users, strategists, finance, operation leaders now have direct access to the tools that help them model scenarios, identify risks, and adapt their plans in real time. And so this is what is truly making AI transformative, which then takes us out of the macro trends on the left side and moves us over to the right side, identifying that the takeaway is that AI is moving from being a productivity tool to being a strategy enabler. It's not just about doing the tasks, it's about making better and faster strategic decisions, which I know is what we all are most motivated by in order to not just accomplish our strategic initiatives, but to shine as we're doing that.
One thing I'd love to press in on there, Shannon, that I think you hit on is that speed of learning and versus scale alone. I think one of the cool things that we've started to see this unlock is industries that historically have not always moved as quickly. Industries where it is a lot harder to make quick iterations and pivots, things that have much longer term and lasting impacts, are able to start to be more agile. And I think that AI has really unlocked that. So we work with a number of customers, whether that be in manufacturing, in nonprofit, in education, in areas that haven't always been on the forefront of things, not because of lack of desire, but potentially like regulation changes or things like that, are now starting to to dip their toes into that. And I think strategy and operations leaders in particular are best suited to help lead that change. We're going to get to this here in a moment, but I think that there is a level of intentionality it requires. But I think I've seen a lot of excitement from folks who um, haven't always had access to the latest and greatest tools or things like that, start to realize like, oh, this is something that can change my day to day within my industry that historically maybe hasn't been the case as much.
I love that.
With that, let's start to dive into some of these risks and cautions. And I realize we're framing this from a negative lens, but with each of these, I want to speak to the opportunity or the positive that goes alongside this. So the first thing that I always like to call out is we as humans, myself included, have this temptation for shiny objects. We love new things, the latest and greatest. I do not have the newest iPhone, but there's all this buzz around it, right? We rush to the store to get the newest thing. When we think about AI in particular, and I think specifically for us in strategy and operations, or related or kind of adjacent fields here, one of the things that I think is really, really important is that when we think about implementing AI, we do so with clarity. We do so with the end in mind. What are we actually trying to accomplish? Um, what we have seen is that AI can be amazing, and you can also spend a lot of time on something that doesn't end up helping you. Um, and that can lead to a lot of wasted effort. Specifically with this, I think that there's a difference between learning and just going and exploring for the sake of exploring, and then what you then implement with your teams. And so I think there needs to be a distinguishing kind of factor there. I am all for go learn, explore, test things out. But as we think about bringing this into strategy, that lens, and how we carry that out to the business, we're going to talk through some organizational risks here in a moment. But I think that the level of clarity that you can give, even from the onset of what question are you seeking to answer, what job to be done are you seeking to accomplish, that's going to be really, really important so that we don't just throw new tools in there. Tools alone are not going to win. If you've engaged with us in any capacity, you have probably heard us talk about this trifecta of people, process, and solution. And to us, one of the things we have seen play out amongst our hundreds of customers, thousands of strategic plans we've looked at, is that it is those three things together, not separate, that make strategy go well. You have to have the right people in place. You have to have the right processes in place. And then you bring in this solution to amplify those. If you just toss a solution at something, it may work to start, but it will quickly fall apart. And so we always talk about when you think about AI is no different, the change management around that and how you're implementing this with your team, whether that be your strategy team or a broader leadership or team that you serve. It's not just about the tool. It's doing so with the end in mind, and making sure that you're really starting with that why. That then leads us to the organizational risks side of things. So this is probably not new news to a lot of folks, but in case it is, one of the things that we want to think about with this is who are we asking to adopt this AI? Whether that's a specific tool within or a specific function within a tool they already use, a new tool, or even a generic tool like ChatGPT or something of the like. The reality is forcing AI just out of the gate without a lot of clarity can trigger a lot of resistance for folks. I know we have everyone from a one all the way up. I think the highest we saw was like a seven or eight on here. And the reality is your team that you're working with, that broader team, is all going to be on that range as well. You're going to have some folks that we were actually just talking with a customer who was talking about how they've implemented AI and how initially there was quite a bit of resistance met with a specific team of theirs that was worried, is this going to take my job, right? That's the question we're constantly hearing. as they've implemented, they've come to realize like, whoa, this actually makes me way faster at my job, and I'm actually able to do way more and not have to do some of the manual things that I did before. But we have to understand who we're rolling it out to, be mindful of that, and recognize that there's going to be varying reactions to that. So the way in which we do this is important. The other piece that I will share of folks being on that 1 to 10 scale is that there's going to be different levels of understanding of risks associated with AI. And specifically on this piece, I mean the data side of things. Strategy and operations leaders, we use, we leverage tools, but we also have access to a lot of information. And I'll talk about that here in a moment to kind of wrap this section up. But we need to be really mindful, and AI does demand strong governance. You can't just throw AI at the wind and say, everyone just sign up for a free ChatGPT account and like go start using it. Because all of a sudden people are dumping business data in there and models get trained off of that. And there's a lot of risks there. I'm sure this is not, again, new news to anyone. But I share that as you think about who you're rolling this out to, not only is their comfortability going to be 1 to 10, but their understanding of what that information does, where it goes, is also going to be on a scale of 1 to 10. And so making sure that you're really, really mindful. A lot of times this is partnering with a security and a compliance department, an IT department, to make sure that there is strong governance around that of what is allowed, what's not allowed. We internally do our own training on this. And this is something, it can be done in fun ways. This doesn't have to be boring, endless documents. I think our team turned this into like Jeopardy style Q&A to really test some folks, but it does demand strong governance. And so we want to call that out, that there are organizational risks with AI, especially if you're using more generic tooling, which really brings us into this last section, which is all around doing all of this with intentionality. Generally speaking, when you're thinking about getting started with AI, I think the easiest place for most people to start is just a general chat function. So again, ChatGPT, Gemini, whatever you're specifically using there, that is a really great place to start, and it can help you get from 0 to 1. But as we anchor back to that first kind of purple loop that you're seeing there, one of the things that we want to set out to do is say, why are we doing this? What is the intended outcome or impact we're hoping to make? And when we think about strategy and operations specifically, general tooling can get us started, but it likely won't get us all the way there. And so that's where we really want to think through intentionality with AI on using domain-specific platforms. What we mean by that is something specific to what you're doing. For us, that's obviously strategy and operations, but for every area of the department, that can look different, or every area of the company, that can look different department by department. But doing so in an intentional way really helps with both of those first two. It helps you, one, be more intentional with what you're trying to do, and making sure you're achieving those goals. It also helps you with more of the governance side of things, because domains or kind of department specific platforms are going to be more anchored around security and compliance with that. But ultimately, what we find is that that is what leads to deeper value of that investment. AI is often a dollar investment, but it's certainly also a time investment too. And so, like anything that we would invest in, we want to be mindful of like, what are we putting in? What are we getting out? Asking a generic question to a generic tool can give you a lot of answers, but you may need to spend a lot more time refining that. Asking a similar question or leveraging a similar feature set within a kind of focused strategy specific platform for the context of our conversations is going to lead to a different type of outcome or answer, because it's more anchored on those pieces. So as we think about these risks and cautions, they're just things we want to be mindful of. It doesn't mean you should never use AI. In fact, I would say the opposite. It just means let's do it with intention. Let's make sure we're not just, dumping our entire strategic plan into a chat GPT and hoping it gives us something back. There's some risk associated with that. Please don't do that on a free account. But we'll talk into that here in a moment. But these are some of the risks or cautions that we like to speak to, because as operations and strategy folks, I think our brain often goes to like what can go wrong first. And then, okay, now that we know those things, how can we still get to the same end outcome?
I love that. I don't have anything to add because I get most excited about what's on the next slide. So I'm gonna push us there, Abby.
Let's go. All right. As we think about everything that we've shared, from what Shannon mentioned on the big picture side of things to what we just talked about on some of the risks, and how we can take those risks and turn them into opportunities, one of the biggest things that we are seeing as an opportunity for all folks going forward, but especially those in seats like those of you who are joining in some sort of strategy or operations or adjacent related role, is that AI can truly serve as a strategy thought partner. What I want to say here at the onset is a couple things. One, when we think about AI in general, I mentioned this with the call we had earlier today, but we want to be mindful that strategy doesn't, or AI doesn't become something that we think can just run our strategy. Um, we are firm believers that for businesses, your strategy has to be living and breathing, and humans are a huge component of that, right? There's just a level of understanding that we can bring to this. However, what we have this opportunity to do is unlock us as humans into deeper superpowers by allowing AI to serve alongside us as a thought partner to do things more efficiently, to get more context than what we maybe would have had or been able to do within a 24-hour window that we all are living in on a day-to-day basis. And so there's really kind of three main areas that we see the kind of initial entry points of this thought partnership with AI entering into. The first is all around strategic planning and how we actually think about the planning process itself. I'll address the elephant in the room that obviously this is a webinar. Shannon and I both work for Elate, so there's elements of this that are, I will say, very much top of mind for us right now. There's some announcements coming out soon here in the next couple of weeks. We're not going to dive into Elate as a platform or those things specifically today. We're going to talk about, frankly, like how we're even thinking about this, because I think that there's a lot of practicality here that and is an important lens for all of us, regardless of if you are leveraging Elate or not. But as I mentioned, that first piece is all around the planning process itself. One of the things that we see time and time again when we're meeting with customers or prospects or providing kind of consulting and advice is all around the amount of time that gets spent in the initial planning cycles. For those of you who are on a January 1 calendar fiscal year, this is probably starting to feel very real. We're in October. We all know that half of November and half of December is typically a wash. So we're starting this right now, and we're probably already thinking about the calendars and the schedules and aligning people's time and offsites and all of those things. The thing I would say is, rightfully so, we spend a lot of time in these planning cycles. However, what I would challenge is that sometimes that time is not always used as efficiently as it can be. So when we think about going into these planning cycles, often as strategy leaders, one of the things that we do first is try to consume as much information as possible over what's happened in the last year, 5 years, 10 years. Depending on your tenure of the business, that's going to be easier or harder. If you are coming in and you've only been at the company for less than a year, you know that one of the biggest challenges is trying to understand how we arrived at a decision that you weren't part of. Um, what were we thinking at that point in time? What information did we have then? Why did we choose that? AI can be really, really helpful at bringing together the context of a ton of information into a much more succinct way. We used to do this manually for folks in the form of a TLDR, too long didn't read, here's what you need to know. AI can be really, really helpful for that as you think about trying to think about 10 years worth of information on your company. You will run out of hours in the day to be able to truly do that and do it well. And this is where AI can be really helpful in that. It also, in tandem with that data, it can also start to help with some of the things Shannon mentioned earlier around scenario modeling, predictive forecasting. Again, not necessarily telling you how you're going to get there or exactly where you're going to go, but it does help provide some buffers and guardrails rather, around the types of goals you're setting. How realistic and achievable are those based off of past performance, based off of market data, things that might live in your head, things that might live outside of your head. It can do that in a much more efficient way. I also don't have a bullet on this, but I think this is also where AI can come in to really help folks who struggle with creating a strategy from scratch. So maybe you've implemented a 3-year strategy, you're starting over, you're implementing a new 3-year strategy, or maybe you're in the middle of it and realizing that strategy is not serving us any well, we need to start over. AI can be a really, really great starting point at thinking through the initial ideas, themes, areas of focus that can require a lot of time on humans if we don't leverage things like that. Again, skimming through information, whether that be past decks, past um, you know, Excel sheets, data, things like that, to kind of help shape where your focus should be. That said, I want to reaffirm that it is on us as humans to refine that. There's a lot of information we know as well that needs to be brought to light there. And so it is not AI replacing that planning process. I would not ask AI to write your whole strategy and then just plug it in and hope it works. It is using that as a thought partner alongside you in that planning cycle and journey. So as you go into those offsites with executives, which are so crucial, but also very expensive in terms of time spent, you can use that time to the best of your ability and make sure that you're really focusing in on the right things, asking the right questions, and having the right discussions.
Yeah, Abby, I really like that too, because one of the things that's underneath what you're saying is that, as strategy leaders, a lot of us do a lot of different things other than just execute the strategy. If that's your role, I'm very jealous. I wish that was the case, but a lot of times, I'm assuming most of you on this call, you touch a lot of different areas, which I think segues really nicely into the execution and adaptability, because the theme in that category is ultimately AI is going to give you the opportunity to understand and execute much quicker with information that you wouldn't have had available instead of sitting with every single department chair and spending an hour understanding all of the variability and all of the different forecasting that's going into the decisions on how they're refining what their key metrics are and how they're tracking that. So I won't steal your thunder on the bullet points here, but I just want to call out that I think this is a great opportunity to recognize that my biggest favorability towards AI is that it gives me an understanding of things beyond what is my typical knowledge, which I think is transformative.
I think that's a great point, and it does segue perfectly to this middle section around the execution adaptability. Again, if you have engaged with us in any way, shape, or form, or pulse readers, whatever that is, you know that we talk a lot about setting your strategy is one thing, how you execute on it is what matters. You can spend all the time in the world creating the most beautiful strategy. And if no one's actually going and executing on it, then all you have is a really beautiful slide deck where some people literally print this out and have it collecting dust on a shelf on the wall. That's what we do not want. And so when we think about how AI serves as a thought partner in the execution side of things, this is where we start to see things like allowing folks to align their goals across departments. This is probably one of the biggest pain points or challenges we see consistently is that folks go in their silos, set their goals, and then they go and achieve those goals without thinking about how they interact with other functions or departments, who they're reliant on, who's reliant on them, who's impacted by the work they're doing. And so AI can be a really, really valuable thought partner in helping you bring these goals together and say, help me understand where these things connect or don't connect. Help me understand where someone's dependent on something that isn't being kind of accounted for over here. As you get into that execution phase, this is also where we can start to surface blockers in more real time. We all know that the the blockers are going to be there. What's really, really painful is when it takes so much time to dig in to try to even uncover or find those. That's where we lose a lot of time and efficiency gains. And Shannon, to your point, most people, I would assume almost everyone on this call, if not everyone, has to juggle a lot of different things at a given time. They're wearing a lot of different hats. And so that heads down time to go just dig in to try to find these risks or find these blockers can be fruitful, but it can take a lot of time. And so AI can be really, really valuable at sifting through the noise and helping to bring to light those blockers so that they can be discussed and acted upon. The last bullet here is probably my favorite one to touch on, which is we as strategy leaders are constantly living in the strategy world. However, when we think about democratizing AI, specifically strategy AI, to our other leaders in the org who are focused on marketing or focused on building something or focused on sales, whatever that may be, what we unlock is less time focused on, hey, let me make a PowerPoint on, this is where we're at, here's what my data says, and more time on thinking about what that data means, more time on actually allowing them to be strategic. For some folks, this comes super naturally. For some folks, strategy is not in their natural wheelhouse. And so this allows them time and space and even guidance to become strategy experts themselves. I jokingly was talking with someone the other day, like, imagine a world if every person on your executive or leadership team had a strategy bend. Like that would be incredible because they have so much deep knowledge about their specific department and area, which is invaluable. But you layer strategic thought on top of that, and all of a sudden you unlock this whole new potential. And I would argue that most leaders at that level do have that bend. they often do not have enough time to actually think about the information in that way because they're so focused on fighting the fires of the day, focused on gathering the data. I think we've all been part of, the QBR is coming up. Okay, we probably need to spend like 3 days just on gathering information and putting it in slides, not even thinking about what it means, just getting that information. And so this is like a big one for me because I think it has massive business impact.
Well, and I think about too, imagine I'm standing in front of a classroom and I say, raise your hand if you struggle with tracking down status updates that are of high quality and are valuable to you as you are assessing the status of each strategic initiative. And I would imagine everyone in the room, everyone virtually right now, raise your hand because that is applicable to everyone, right? It's very, very challenging to track down every single head that is responsible for every single strategic initiative and get a quality, standardized status update from them. And that is one of the greatest tools that we're seeing AI be able to unlock for strategy and operations leaders is specific on that status gathering. It's huge.
Yeah, the standardization of that is always so challenging, and AI can be so helpful in that because it can force that standardization in a way that we as humans love to avoid, but it makes strategy and operations leaders' jobs way easier when they're more in a standard format. So, totally agree there. As we think about those two pieces coming together, one of the things that kind of is always the third bucket here that we talk about is what do we do with this information? We created a great plan, we're executing on it. So what now? What? Like what do we actually do with that? And in our minds, one of the most important pieces is that we're shifting from being reactive to proactive in how we report, and most specifically, how we make decisions off of the information. And so AI can be an incredible thought partner in this proactivity lens, especially through identifying risks earlier, not for the sake of identifying the risk, but for the sake of sparking the right conversation. The number of executive, whether those are biweekly or monthly meetings that we've chatted with folks about that are just spent talking about where something's at versus what are we going to do about it? Again, this goes back to that cross-functional side of things too, which is not just what am I, leader A, going to do about it, but how are we going to rally around that together as a team, think about this in a new way. That is where proactivity really comes into play. Being able to make these decisions with one, more timely, but two, with better information so that we don't just say like, well, that's good to know that's where it's at. We actually can say, okay, here's how we think we can change that, or here's how we might need to alter our plan, especially as we think about resource allocation. It can help us understand, like, yes, we would love to do that. However, our team is already allocated on these other four things. Like, what do we need to potentially drop in order to go do something else? Or who would we need on our team to be able to go do that? There's a lot of conversations there. And to us, it's all around the action that gets taken, those decisions that get made, because that is what takes planning from being a static document that, again, is V123 final, whatever your file name is, that just lives in a SharePoint or a Google Drive or something like that somewhere, to making this a living and breathing function of your business. Your plans should change. And I'm not saying you should wipe out your strategic plan every single week or month or even quarter. What I am saying is we should constantly be looking at that so that we can start to make the tweaks and pivots that we need based off of the things that are going to come at us that we can't predict when we're in that strategy offsite right now. We cannot know for sure what the world will look like a year from now. So we have to be able to constantly be in control and make that a dynamic process. And AI can be incredibly helpful at that by helping to identify those risks earlier, by helping to understand where there's maybe departments that are overloaded with work, specifically like on key initiatives that we're saying are most important to our business, to identify areas where there's opportunity here, where, hey, we have a team that could help out in that specific way. But all of that centered around and serving, making planning more dynamic and allowing us to make small adjustments versus massive pivots that we know can be really hard on us as humans and our teams, and frankly, hard to implement with a lot of time and energy put into them.
Yeah, I love that. I think to me, this slide articulates kind of the art of the possible. And
Mhm.
I'm sure there's a lot of people, especially if you answered, 1 to 5 as far as what your current adoption or comfortability with AI is. This feels a little abstract and how it actually functions. And so I think I'd like to try and tie us all together on what this means and our recommendations on how to think about it as you kind of go beyond this conversation, which is one. AI is moving and it's moving very quickly, not just in its functionality, but the way in which it's being adapted across various business units. And it is very important that as strategy leaders, not just strategy leaders, but leaders in general, I'm speaking to strategy leaders on this call, understand the pace and the specific applicability of AI, because I imagine a lot of you are starting to feel the downward pressure from your leadership as far as the need to move on AI and show how you're implementing it into your day to day. And so, while that is true, we want to also offer the affirmation that you can be hesitant, you can sound even more in tune with what's happening because you understand what these risks are. The risks exist. They do not have to stop you from moving forward with AI integration into your day-to-day function. If you are intentional and well thought out about how you're going to apply AI to your functionality, these risks will still exist, but they will not get in your way. And the last piece is, a lot of those components on that other slide, you can start to plug those components into a generic LLM. And you will get outputs, right? You can ask AI in an LLM function, come up with a standardization template for me gathering status updates, right? A lot of that is functional in what is very readily available at your hands today. My caveat is that all of those prompts are reliant on you taking the initiative to plug it in and then be able to interpret it and leverage it from there. The tools that are starting to be developed that are strategy specific will be living and breathing. They will be automatically reactive, and you will not have to train your LLM on your strategy or the various components that inform it. That's why when we say it's able to identify risks earlier or standardize X, Y, and Z or allow you to be dynamic or proactive rather than reactive, that is what these strategy specific AI components or these domain specific tools will really allow you to unlock. So that's kind of at a high level, the big picture of what we're hoping to leave you all with, which is encouragement that there is tools that are available. There are ways for us to apply AI that's not just generic or nebulous, which is what I imagine a lot of everyone is hearing in the general conversation sphere around AI. Abby, anything to add?
No, I think that hits the nail on the head, and I think captures a lot of what we've talked about, which I know is a lot here, especially if you're newer to this, that this, even the language can at times be intimidating. I think we've kept it fairly generic, but I think that that captures it perfectly. And I really think takes us perfectly into our Q&A time. And so I'll remind everyone we've got, you should see a Q&A bubble down at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you can drop questions in the chat for us to start answering. So feel free to submit those in there. We'll take a look through those live and just start answering these. There may be some questions that we can't get to today, which is totally fine. We can follow up with you all on answers there. But go ahead and start dropping some of those in. It can be anything around anything we've covered or even anything we haven't covered that you are curious about. Go ahead and drop those in the Q&A and we'll start fielding those. All right. Shannon, it looks like I'm going to tee you up for this question, but I'm happy to add on to it if you'd like. Uh, we talked about this a little bit in the risks piece, but looks like we want to know how do we overcome resistance from employees who fear being replaced? This is a very real fear and one that many people feel. Shannon, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that is going to be an industry by industry specific reaction or answer. But in general, what we have now seen, AI has been being implemented across industries for now enough time for us to have good, strong evidence that that is traditionally not the case, meaning that AI is not going to come in and one for one replace or replicate someone's job or make them lose it. And so I would encourage you to seek out more industry specific evidence as supporting that argument. I can sit here and tell you like that is not the case. That is the summary of the answer to your question is that we do not see evidence that supports the argument that AI will just replace people's jobs. But I would encourage and empower you to seek that out specifically for your industry area so you can have more tangible evidence to support that. 3 years ago when that question was originally being surfaced, there was a lot more hesitancy because leaders just had to say, hey, trust us, trust us, trust us. Now we have more evidence to support that. And I'll add not only support that they won't just lose their jobs, but that those jobs then become more manageable and more attainable. People have more time to do things that they might be more excited to execute on rather than their day-to-day functionality. So I would say yes, and yes, your job is safe, and we're also providing you the opportunity to scale yourself and bring more fulfillment to your day-to-day functionality.
Yeah. The one thing I would add to that is show them, don't just tell them. Show them the possibility. This actually goes with another question that got asked in the chat around suggestions for leaders who are in their career twilight and how they might approach AI. And I think that these camps tend to overlap. And I always think like showing is always going to be more valuable than just telling folks. And so showing them what's possible, opening up, sitting alongside folks, you'd be surprised how far that can go. And I would also say, I think a lot of folks who are in their I love this career twilight kind of stage of life or stage of business, underestimate or rather overestimate the level of effort required to just start using AI. And so I think the more you can sit alongside someone, show them, don't just tell them. To your point, Shannon, it's going to depend on industry, but I think that that can go a long way in building up that trust and helping them to see what's possible by leveraging this.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions coming in here, so I'm going to try to sort through a few of these live. All right, we have one around how do you manage the use of multiple AI tools across the organization, especially given that often the same prompt will generate different answers over time. As leaders, how do you bring these insights together to make solid business decisions? I'm happy to take a start on that one, and then Shannon, feel free to add some color here.
Right. Yes.
Because we talked about this, right? With domain specific tooling, it means you're going to get a number of different platforms leveraged in your business that is going to give you different outputs. In fact, you ask the same LLM or the same AI tool a question and a day apart, and you might get a different answer. This is where we are really, really focused on making sure that AI is a thought partner alongside you and that you're not taking the output of an AI tool of any sort, copy and pasting that and sending it to your CEO or whatever that looks like. This should have a layer of thought on top of that. Really press in on what kind of data does that tool have access to? Because more often than not, it will likely be a limited data set. If you leverage AI within maybe one of your CRMs or ERP softwares, there's going to be a limited set of, a vast, but limited set of information and angle and lens in which that's going to answer from, versus a tool that has a line of sight or lens into multiple functions or departments. So I think that's going to be a key for that is know that the answer you're getting is always going to be in light of the data that it has access to. And so when we think about strategy, that tends to be broader. And so if you ask a strategy question of a specific tool that's maybe only anchored on the sales side, the answer you're going to get is going to be more centered on that. So that's one thing I would take into account as you think about bringing these together. What I'm not saying is don't ask those questions of multiple tools. What I am saying is then take those, funnel it through the lens of what you know as a human of where is that coming from? What data is it being supported by? And then understand how does that make sense in light of what you also know of the business. And again, leverage it as that thought partner, not as your replacement, so that you can create a compelling case based off of what you know and what the AI has allowed you to ingest in a much more streamlined way. Anything you'd add to that, Shannon?
Yeah, I think I would also encourage you to ask yourself, what is the purpose of using AI? You're going to see, say in a project management software tool, they're starting to just deploy AI solutions that might refine a really long formula that's going to refine the way in which the data is shown or being collected or the functionality of that sheet in of itself. That is a very isolated use case of AI, and that can leverage, your operations, your finance data. Possibilities are very endless there. That is different than, prompting, based off of this information, what are the highest level risks here that you're seeing, right? That's a different inherent use case. And so while I think when people think of AI, again, they're really thinking of these like LLMs, your ChatGPT, your Gemini. I would encourage people to start thinking about the art of possible when it comes to these domain specific AI functionalities of being able to drill down beyond that general level and get really specific. And in that case, I don't think that there's necessarily always a need for each and every one of those tools to speak to each other, depending on what their ultimate goal and purpose is. However, with strategy and strategy specific AI tools, you can start to layer that in because you're feeding it so many different elements naturally and progressively rather than just a single prompt in a general space or a specific finance formulaic reaction or response. That
Yeah,
would be
that's,
my answer.
yeah, I totally agree. We have two questions that are getting at a similar thing, so I'm going to combine these here for a moment. The first question is around specific tools that you can use around standardizing status collecting. This is always a pain point. And the second one is very similar to how you can use AI to force or enhance the standardization of status reporting tips that we have there. And I think those are getting at something very, very similar. Shan, do you want to start with this and I can layer on?
Yeah, absolutely. The first approach to me is using AI to one, give recommendations on what a good quality status update looks like. And I always say I don't want to necessarily defer to AI as being the validation component, but you as the strategy leader being able to guide AI into what you want that to be. The quality status update for myself might vary from what Abby expects as a high quality status update. And so you as the leader really take the authority and then leverage AI to be the balancing board on that. So having them be able to fine tune what you're determining as good quality, I think is a starting point. The next layer and level into that without going into too many specifics about what Elate is, revealing or putting out is that platforms and tools will be able to give you the opportunity for that to just default into the status update itself. That meaning that someone would be able to just go to the box where they're expected to put in their status update, and that default commentary expectation would be automatically on the screen rather than someone having to type out from scratch what that looks and sounds like. Did I do a decent job with that, Abby?
I think you towed the line well. Tim's on here, so maybe he'll just cut us off if we go too deep or reveal too much. But I think on top of that, what you mentioned, Shannon, around the how do we know what's a quality update? I think a lot of times it's not that folks don't want to leave a quality update, they just don't know what the standards are. And there will be a world here very soon. Some people already have access to that, where that is also part of that function of leaving an update is giving AI giving coaching in real time to folks on what should be in a status update. More often than not, I usually see folks give one word answers or like four paragraph answers. And what we really want is somewhere in between of a couple sentences that give context on why do you believe this is on pace, at risk, and behind? What's the data telling you, and what do you know outside of the data? But yes, there is a world in which platforms like Elate can help in that measurement and coaching as well, so that you, as the strategy and operations leader, do not have to um, go coach everyone in real time. It can be done for you, and it can be done in line as they're giving the update, because frankly, that is where I think the value is teaching your team live. So, um, Tim, hopefully we towed the line on that all right.
You guys are doing a great job.
All right. Let's take maybe one or two more here. There's going to be some we can't get to, so we can follow up on those. I think this will we'll be able to follow up via email on some of these, but um, let's focus in on, actually, I love this. What are some resources to start as you're thinking about implementing frameworks and AI? This gets broader to all the way from like policies and then all the way down to tools. But I love the idea of like, let's start small. If we could just start one place, where's the best place to start there? I'm gonna give some initial thoughts and then Shannon, please add in here. Um, I think the most important place to start is thinking about what you're trying to solve within your business. If you have counterparts in similar industries or honestly, even different industries, but similar types of business, whether that be in size, complexity, the nature of what you do, I would really encourage you to start chatting with more folks and asking them how they're doing things. That does not mean take what they're doing and then go copy and paste it. What works for them may not work for you, but I think that that can be a really, really helpful place to start. And a lot of times I'll see folks sharing a lot of this information for free on LinkedIn. It's a great place to go. Frankly, even just doing a simple search can be a great place to start. But I always encourage you to start in the lens of what is the biggest pain point that our business might have right now, or that I as a leader have that I'm trying to solve? Because if you do go generically search, like, where should I start with implementing AI, you're going to get a million ideas. And this is when we talk about that risk of like shiny objects, this is where it's going to be really hard to resist them. You're going to want to start using AI in everything, but you may not actually get it integrated well. And so I would really encourage you to start thinking about what is the pain point you're trying to solve, and then starting to search for things that help solve that pain point versus how should we implement AI. I think a lot of people are getting pressure, whether it be from boards or executives or market pressure, whatever that looks like, to just do AI because everyone's supposed to be doing it. And while I do agree we should be looking at AI, I really focus back in on that intention.
Yeah. And I think you did a really good job, Abby, of being more specific in that. And so I'll actually go the reverse and I'll be a little more general, which is that in order, I think the best starting point is one, ensuring that you've unlocked permission across your entity to begin that exploration and that test driving and that conversation about what AI implementation would look like for your teams. And that has to come from a leadership and general team narrative. A lot of people are hesitant, they are fearful, but they are motivated in this moment. You know, everyone is hearing the conversations around needing to not fall behind, wanting to be leaders, being able to be at the forefront of the conversation rather than be ones that are left behind. But they're going to not everyone is going to necessarily take the initiative on their own. And so as leaders, being the ones to set that tone, to give everyone permission to begin exploring how they can implement it by thinking about what those pain pills are and being creative and just having the freedom to just go and explore, obviously within reason and within a data privacy perspective. But I think if I were to give one piece of advice is where to start, it's to really foster a culture of permission to explore.
I love that. All right, want to be mindful of time here. I know there's a handful of questions we weren't able to get to, so we will follow up with you all separately on those. That said, we want to take a moment. I mentioned this at the onset that this is the first webinar in a broader AI strategy series here at Elate. So there are more to come here. I know, Tim, I saw you dropped the registration links, I think, in the resources. Is that right?
Yeah. So if you look at the resources panel, there will be links to both upcoming sessions. So we have a really exciting one on the 22nd. I know we've alluded to it. We are launching a strategy advisor here in a few weeks, a week and a half now. And the 22nd will be focused on our thoughts and what we've been working on behind the scenes and how we are approaching AI. And we'll be with Abby and our other co-founder, Brooks, for that. So we will be unwrapping Strategy Advisor. And then 2 days later, on the 24th, we will be doing a deep dive into the actual product. So if those interest you, please check out the resources tab on Zoom here with the links. They will also be in the recording email as well. So um, love to see you there.
Yeah, likewise. I know it was fun to see a lot of new names today. As Tim mentioned, I'll be co-leading the webinar here in a couple weeks alongside Brooks. So excited and hope you guys join us. Lastly, Shannon, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time throughout your afternoon or early morning, depending on where you're at in the world, to talk about this. Again, we love talking about it, but it's really fun to get to be in a space with other like-minded leaders. If you are curious and have follow-up questions, things like that, you can always go to our website, goelate.com, but this is Shannon and I's emails as well. So if you need anything, feel free to reach out. You can also find us on LinkedIn. We love to chat about these things, so feel free to follow up there. Thank you all so much for the time, and we hope everyone has a great rest of your Thursday or start to your Friday, for those calling in from Australia.
Okay. Thank you, guys.